Just off the Portman Bridge in sunny Surrey.
We're coming through for you.
Good morning. We all know that when the president of the top university in Western Canada quits in what is obvious frustration to dramatize the plight of the university, there is something far wrong. We all know too that the Social Credit government in Victoria has been making a direct attack on education with a fair amount of support from the public, right or wrong. But the sudden and dramatic disappearance of the man appointed less than 2 years ago from SFU, highly respected, to take over and reshape UBC is something else again. Here's what Dr. Pedersen said at his press conference at UBC yesterday at 1:30 p.m.
I am resigning because I think that the kind of planning situation we're in is such that it is virtually impossible to do a thoughtful job of trying to run a university. I think all of us in the university would accept the notion that we have to perhaps do with less, but we simply can't do it in this sort of time frame. As an example, if we get hit with a 5% cut when that budget speech comes down, I do not honestly believe this university can respond to that.
Now, what does Dr. Pedersen mean? If they get hit with a 5% cut, the university can't respond. They would just have to close classes, throw people out the door, no severance pay, no retirement benefits? We'll find out. But first of all, see what the eminent Dr. McGeer, the tenured professor on staff who runs the universities in effect, see what he had to say from the calm and distance of his office in Victoria.
And it's not unusual for presidents to move from place to place. For example, the president of Western Ontario took the job at the University of Toronto. That happened because the president from the University of Guelph had moved to the University of Toronto, and unfortunately he had a heart attack and died. Of course, your better academics are always going to be in demand at other institutions. And if your academics aren't in heavy demand, I'm talking now about a substantial percentage of them, you should be worried at any time because only the best ones are going to move from place to place. And one of the tests of how strong you are academically is how many of your people are in demand at other institutions.
Then we must take the reaction from Mark Rose, education critic for the NDP.
He's been, I think, an outstanding leader, both in the high schools and later at Simon Fraser and now at UBC. And I think it's a great loss to British Columbia. And I think it merely points out what other losses that we can look forward to if there isn't some change in these savage policies.
Dr. Pedersen is going to the University of Western Ontario in London. We'll find out the details and we'll find out the specific frustrations which caused him to announce his resignation, shorten his contract, and take the job in London after the break.
I'm not surprised that he's done it, actually. He was formerly president of Simon Fraser, where I was before, and he had the same problems there. I think it's a fairly honorable thing for him to have done. I don't know where education goes from here, but I'm not surprised that he's done it.
Yeah. How's that?
Taking good care of us.
It's a little warm in here today. Making sure. Oh, it's warm?
I understand Jack Monroe came over and gave you a hand.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. I'm really proud of UBC. They're giving him a degree, you know.
He's a great guy.
Yes, he is.
Somebody had phoned him from friends.
Yeah, that's what your makeup gal was telling me.
Yeah, and he turns up and runs down.
Yeah. Well,
Perfect time.
I really thought about you, but I decided the hell he's got too many things.
Yeah.
He doesn't need phone calls.
No.
Phone calls are
Yeah.
great, but they're disruptive.
They are. The
That's
difficult to take to.
That's right.
I agree entirely.
Yeah.
However, oh, I know. I trust you realize, Dr. Pedersen, the culture shock that you've probably put many ordinary people into as well as those in academia. How long had you, when did you make the decision to quit and go to Ontario because of the troubles you were having as president of UBC? When did you decide?
I guess the final decision was made about 3 or 4 days ago, Jack. I labored about it for a long period of time. I've had the offer for probably better than 2 weeks and really had to come to grips with it.
You see, that was what worried me when I had it yesterday. Now, here's a university professor who is president who is saying, I got to get the hell out of here because of the frustration, but I'm lucky I've got a job in my hip pocket.
Yes?
Would not some of your friends say, hey, he was all ready to go anyway. He had decided to leave and he just used this as an opportunity to whip the government in Victoria?
No, not at all. Clearly, I'm an alumnus of the University of British Columbia. I'm extremely fond of that institution. I feel badly about leaving it. I would not probably have been making this decision had we not had the kind of circumstances we're faced with at the present time.
Do you feel you're kind of chickening out at this time when the university faces perhaps its gravest crisis in history?
I think that's a fair question to ask, and several people have already asked me. It's a sort of a think-out kind of thing. My response to that has been that when you take on a job, you try to weigh the circumstances you're going into, and you try to assess whether you think you can do an adequate job of it. I did that at the time that the job was offered to me while I was still at Simon Fraser. Came to the conclusion that I thought I could do it. Almost immediately upon my appointment, we began to have a series of events that I think were very detrimental to the university. I think it was within a week of taking over at UBC that Bill 3 came in, for example, and all the tenure issue was thrown up in the air, an issue that, in my view, should not necessarily have even come into being as far as the universities were concerned. There's been no change as a result of that, and what it did was a tremendous amount of damage to the reputation of BC universities.
In other words, it collapsed the morale at UBC too, is that not correct?
Yes.
It made you one of the universities throughout the world that could say, don't go to UBC, they're going to cancel the academic essential measure of tenure.
That's right.
But it never did happen.
No, it did not happen. It turned out the way the legislation was drafted would not make it relevant to the university scene. But there was a great deal of confusion about it and a great deal of media coverage, of course, and it's the coverage that did the damage.
Well, you're not blaming us for the coverage, are you?
No.
I'll
blame you for some other things, Jack.
One key thing which you said in your statement yesterday, which I'd like you to be quite specific about, that if you face a 5% cut in your budget, and I've noticed, by the way, Ontario universities have got a 5% increase this
That's
morning.
what I understand.
But if you face a 5% cut, you say that as president, you could not respond. What do you mean you could not respond? If the boss tells you to cut 5%, you cut 5%.
Well, the only way in which the University of British Columbia, or either of the other universities for that matter, could respond to that would be simply to say that as of the first day of the fiscal year, which is April 1, X number of people are discontinued. They're no longer on the payroll, and those students who are in those programs will simply not be able to complete their degree programs. I would like to believe we're not going to be that harsh, and I don't in fact think we could do that. I don't think that the courts would allow us to terminate people on that sort of basis.
Your successor, however, in all likelihood will be faced with that hard decision unless, because of your dramatic leave-taking, it changes its mind.
Well, we have worked hard, I think, with government and government people for the past 4 months to provide them with the sorts of information that we thought was necessary, that they completely understand the implications of various funding decisions. And among other things, we've shown what it would take in a phase-out basis. That is to say, if you're going to discontinue a particular program, you undoubtedly have to maintain, at least I think you have to maintain that at least until the students who are in it can have an opportunity to complete their degree programs. And those all have fairly sizable cost implications associated with them. Indeed, the dollar signs at the bottom line don't start looking black, they don't look positive until 4 or 5 years out because of all of the termination pay costs you're going to have associated with the kind of potential cuts.
As of, you're now no longer president, is that
That's
correct?
right, that's right, I'm unemployed.
So as of, no you're not, you're just between engagements, 120,000 a year you got at UBC. I'm not going to ask you what you're getting at Western
It's a good thing because
Ontario.
I won't ask you what you make either, Jack.
I'm not on the public payroll. I've said this to many public officials. You are on the taxpayer's back, right or wrong. I am not directly on the taxpayer's
You're
back.
kind of touchy about that one, I noticed.
But as of yesterday morning, when you were still in office there,
Yes.
you had no budget allowance or amount on which you could plan the university for the 1st of April.
No, we have had figures that range from a -5, which we were hearing in November, and I've heard rumors as high as a +2. And in that 7% range, you've got a lot of money because every 1% for UBC is $1.7 million.
But you're the president, or well, the president of UBC. Are you telling me that the government officials or the minister responsible or the university's council had not told you whether you're going to go up or down?
Well, the indications are clearly that we're going to be down, that we're going to be in difficulty, and we're going through all of the planning that one can possibly do.
Alternate planning.
Alternate planning, optional, just,
So
that's right.
therefore you were in a frustrated fog, you might say, as to the future of your administration.
Yeah, but to be fair to the government, excuse me, that situation has been true every year. We have never really known what our budget's going to be until, more often than not, until the budget speech. And indeed, we have had occasions when we have not known until 3-4 months into the fiscal year.
Now, one very important point. In the budget speech, there was a kind of veiled innuendo that you were being told what to do in the way of programs to cut, that you would get more money if you cut or enforced the right programs. Did you interpret that as a possible infringement of academic freedom and planning?
It's hard for me to react to that because we don't know the detail
But
of it.
I'm right in the implication.
Well, that's the inference I have drawn from that is there is potential government intervention into the university community in trying to decide what sorts of priorities we ought to have.
Do you deny that there is need for restraint?
Oh, no, I've never denied that, and I tried to make very clear yesterday that was not the basis on which I made the decision I made.
Would you agree with Dr. McGeer that the students of these days, and he said it on this program, are lazy and have a much softer time than they should have?
No, I don't agree with them at all on that.
Was Dr. McGeer one of the principal frictions which caused you to come to your decision?
Well, I rather stay away from identifying personalities, and let me say that I think it was much more of the question of what the policy of the government is with respect to the university.
But it must have been embarrassing to have a tenured professor on your staff who is the minister in charge of universities, etc., etc. Surely.
What do you mean? Why is that?
Conflict of interest by the minister.
Well, but there are all kinds of people who serve in our legislatures who have conflicts of interest. I don't think you ought to pick on university professors per se.
Okay, next with Dr. Pedersen, I want to go through what has happened in a negative fashion in the University of British Columbia over the past 23 or 24 months after the break.
I think he's making a personal protest about what's happening in this province, and
do you think that's a good protest?
It's a good protest, but I hate to see him go because, much as we've had our disagreements with him, I think I would much rather deal with him than with Smith, to be honest.
I have nothing. Okay.
I'm all right. All we need are fingers for times. There's nothing additional on the program. Okay.
Do you want a cold glass of water?
No, I'm fine. I'll have a little more coffee.
Have you taken a prescription?
Yeah, nice.
Much of British Columbia's educational community is still stunned by the dramatic and sudden resignation yesterday of Dr. George Pedersen at UBC. And even I was astonished, Dr. Pedersen, when you said that one reason you quit is that you could not provide strong leadership. Is that not an admission of failure? Or is this your strong leadership saying, I'm getting the hell out of here?
I guess I'm simply saying, Jack, that under the kinds of conditions we have currently, I don't think any university president in British Columbia can provide strong leadership. All we're doing on a regular basis is reacting. and reacting in a time frame that is simply an impossible kind of time frame in which to react.
Let's go through some of the things that have happened under your administration. How much were the fees put up last year?
33% last year.
How much have they been put up this year?
10%, and probably would have been put up higher had we thought there was any way in which students could afford to pay them.
What was the net cut you had to make last year?
It was very close to $9 million that we cut out.
How many supporting faculty people have you laid off since you were president?
Well, I don't know what the total is. The total will be higher than this. I know last year alone there were 190.
What about restriction in enrollment? You've partially closed the doors to UBC.
Well, of course, we've always had a lot of enrollment restriction in the professional areas, such as medicine and so forth. But last year we had to put an overall limitation on the basic areas of art, science, and education.
Your UBC fact sheet gives a figure which staggers me about the 4-year debt in UBC for a student here that's against Ontario.
Yes.
Do you know the figures?
Yes, the estimates of our financial aid people would be that assuming that one has to pay for board and room, not live at home in other words, for nothing, the fee would be something like $20,000 plus here, as opposed to about $5,000 in Ontario.
All right, one of the great attacks on the universities at one time, a few years back before you were there, was on the salary levels of the professors. How does UBC now stand on salary levels in relation to other Canadian universities?
Well, it wasn't that long ago that all 3 BC universities ranked right near the top. In fact, in a number of ranks, we were probably number 1, 2, or 3. That has changed very dramatically. There have been no salary increases of any kind at UBC for the past 2 years, and we are now, I believe, ranked 10th in the country as a whole.
Now, with your departure to University of Western Ontario, can you tell me how much dissatisfaction and how many job offers have been received by people on the faculty in your administration? What kind of pressure there is on people?
Well, I couldn't give you any sort of a number in response to that question, but I can say to you that I know large numbers of extremely able people, and UBC has a lot of them, are receiving offers on a regular basis. I have met with at least 4 or 5 people in the last 2 weeks trying to convince them that it's a good place to stay. Undoubtedly, they think those conversations now are somewhat ironic given my decision. But nevertheless, these are people who have offers. Well, in one case, the individual has offers from 14 major institutions in North America, most of them in the United States, and at salaries much dramatically higher than we're offering, or could even offer in the best of times. The difference, however, is that they're entertaining them now because there is a perception that says that the milieu in which we're living here, that the political climate and the attitude toward the universities is such that it's perhaps time to move on.
In other words, that what has gone around the academic community is that British Columbia is led by rednecks who are not concerned about the quality or the organization of university life.
Well, I don't know what the story is. All of the academic community would read is that this is a good opportunity perhaps to try to persuade people that they've been trying to get for some time, see if they're prepared to move.
You yourself were not particularly happy with the standard of UBC in your administration, were you? You called it here a second-grade university. Is that correct?
I don't think I used that word. I think that was a term you coined. What I was trying to...
I didn't mean you. Yeah, you said second-class university compared to the best on the continent.
Yeah, what I indicated, I think, in the conversation, if I remember it correctly, was that we do not in Canada have any Cambridges, Oxfords, Harvards, Stanfords. We tend to have very good universities, but not the ones that are sort of totally on the cutting edge. Mm-hmm. But that's not in any way to demean what we have. I think the University of British Columbia is a superb institution, has some very outstanding individuals in it. It's not to say it doesn't have its share of warts. Every institution has those. But there are a lot of things about which you could be very positive as far as UBC is concerned.
Do you feel that the government is aiming at a restructuring of the universities? I don't mean under one campus, but they're so dead set on making economies that perhaps they don't need 2 law schools, 2 teaching places, too many doctors perhaps. Do you think that the drive will be to cut down all 3 universities and restrict some of the departments altogether, wipe out departments?
Well, there's no question that the overall goal here is to make the university system smaller than it is at the present time. It's also correct to say that the question of access is not of concern to this government. I have asked the minister that question directly.
And you mean by that, the question of access, you mean the right of a British Columbian to get to university?
That's right. That's right. That is not a big issue here. There's never been any sort of public policy statement on it, as you'd find in some other provinces. But at the present time, as you are already aware, we have the lowest participation rate in our 18 to 24-year-olds of any province in Canada, and if my understanding is correct, that rate will in fact go down.
Does this bode evil for the whole system?
I think it bodes evil if you're really serious about British Columbia moving into a new era of development. If we're moving out of the period when we're totally dependent on a resource economy into one that's fitting into the, I don't know what you're calling it, communication revolution or whatever, if we're going to do that, it is going to be absolutely essential that we have a high-quality university system. I don't know whether you follow the Financial Post, but there was recently a full-page ad put in by the state of California in which it was encouraging business and industry to come to California, and the sell was the high-quality manpower they have there, the well-educated manpower that they have in the state of California. California, which is a very conservative state, always has been putting large infusions of dollars into their university system in the last few years, recognizing that if they're going to compete with Southeast Asia and other parts of the world in high tech, all of these new areas that we think we're moving into, they've got to have the manpower. And I don't see us going that direction.
How would you therefore describe our basic, by that I mean the government and many people's basic attitudes towards university? The wrong attitudes.
Yeah, my perception is that we're not very high priority as far as the government is concerned, and indeed on the part of many of the public. There's been a great deal of agitation and concern in the media and elsewhere about the elementary and secondary schools, and obviously I share some of the concern of what's happening there. But there has been much less in the way of opportunity to make the case for the university system. And indeed, in relative terms, the university system has been much less well supported in recent years than has any other part of the public sector.
Well, Dr. McGeer sat here only a few weeks ago and made the case for the cream of the crop and talked about lazy students. Perhaps that helps to set the climate for our attitudes towards universities.
Well, I said earlier I don't want to get into personalities, and I certainly don't, because in many ways Dr. McGeer and I share some real values that are important as far as universities are concerned. But there certainly are occasions when I would be a little more comfortable if he described some of the positive things we do in our university rather than some of the negative things.
Because basically it's still a good university.
Certainly it's a good university. It has a number of units that are outstanding internationally. Absolutely no question about that.
But right now you may be faced, I see the architecture students protesting downtown, perhaps the loss of the School of Architecture?
Potentially. I mean, it's one of the schools that has been asked some questions about its appropriateness, given the possibility of program cut.
Have you asked, in your capacity before you left as president, if this is not a breach of confidence, every single department to show cause why it should not be trimmed down to nothing?
No, we have not asked every single department. We have gone through a fairly careful, I think, thoughtful academic exercise of reviewing our academic departments using certain criteria and certain sort of classifications of significance to the mission of the university. And out of that has developed a list of about 35 different units, and questions have been asked about those units.
These are the 35 on which you had your eye?
That's right.
To wipe out altogether or merely to
trim? Not necessarily. There are a variety of different questions that are being asked. In some cases, the questions being asked, should we be continuing it, and if so, why? In other cases, we're asking questions of the possibility of reducing it in size, and so forth. And I think it's important that I emphasize here that no decisions have been made at the present time. A lot of questions have been asked. No decisions have been made. No decisions can be made until such time as we know next year's budget. We don't know what that budget is. We don't know the extent to which we're going to have to reduce our program size at the University of British Columbia, if we have to reduce it at all.
And you're within 3 weeks of that day of reckoning.
That's right.
More with Dr. George Pedersen, and I'll be taking calls from the public too after the break. Dr. Pedersen, when do you actually leave for Western Ont?
That hasn't been worked out yet. The understanding I have with them is that I will be there by at least August the 1st.
August the 1st. So you have a couple of months to cogitate.
Yes, or something.
Or something.
Well,
now,
those are really to be negotiated.
The biggest allegation against the provincial government of financial mismanagement is the lack of application of federal funds to university. They have increased their federal grants this year, as I recall, 7.5%.
That's right.
Will you see them?
We don't know.
Did you
But
ever see them?
No, none of the increases that the federal government has provided for what they describe as post-secondary education, and I'll explain that comment in a minute, none of that has been passed through since 1978 in British Columbia.
Well, that's tragic, is it not?
Yeah, well, it is from our point of view. You just described what's going to happen in Ontario, an increase of 5%. Most provinces will be of that order, perhaps a little bit higher. But nevertheless, most provinces at least pass through the proportion that is purported by the federal government to be available for post-secondary education.
Many people still applaud the restraint program of the social credit government, and they include restraint on the universities in that particular field. But the one point which seems to be quite hard is that this money was supposed to go to university over all these years, and you didn't get it.
Well, we think that's unfortunate, but I want to be fair to the provincial government on this issue. Let me just try to explain it.
Please.
In 1977, when the last agreement was worked out under something called Established Programs Financing, there was an agreement made to provide federal grants, or transfers, and they took the form of both cash and tax points, that would be made available for health care costs, including Medicare, and for post-secondary education. There was no division of that money at the time. It was just a large grant. It was categorical in the broad sense I just described it.
Right.
In 1982, when that agreement came up for renewal, it was decided not to renew because energy was in the air and there was a lot of friction between the two levels of government. And so the decision was made to extend it. The federal government, and Mr. Curtis, if he were sitting here, would say federal government unilaterally decided what proportion was for what purpose. And they put the 6 and 5 ceiling on the post-secondary education side, no ceiling on the healthcare side. And so we've had a situation where for the past 2 years, those increases have been limited, but there has been a specific amount identified by the federal government as being for that purpose. And an act was passed, I think in 1984, formalizing all of that. The debate will be, if you were having a federal member here and a provincial member, would be as to whether or not it's designated. We would like to believe that it's to be used for the purpose for which it's being sent along. There's in fact, in terms of the proportion that's provided by the provincial government, federal authorities would argue that 92% of that is provided by the federal government.
But
the provinces.
you would concede the point that the provincial government has a legitimate concern about how it can allocate this according to its pressing needs for health and or education.
No quarrel at all with that.
Your biggest thing, is it correct, said he, is your biggest single complaint the fact that you weren't told, neither SFU or it here, with the proper advance timing, what damn money you were going to get?
Yeah, what I'm saying, Jack, is that the basic frustration is the fact that we don't know where we're going. We don't have any idea how much money we're going to have, and we don't have that in a time frame with enough lead time that we can do the sort of planning that's necessary. Universities are not like some branch plant of a manufacturing company where if the demand for the product drops, I close it down, I get rid of the sales staff and all the rest of it, and we're over, finished, out. We can't do it that way. We start up new programs slowly. If you're going to do the closing down exercise, it's going to go just about as slowly, and that doesn't seem to be understood at all.
And when you give a golden handshake or early retirement to somebody, at the moment, you haven't even got the money to finance that handshake.
No, in order to balance our budget for this current fiscal year, 84-5, we entered into agreements with close to 50 faculty members who are prepared to take early retirement. And that, of course, entails termination pay.
$2.7 million.
$2.6 million. And it was our understanding that those funds would be made available to the university. Given we have no other way in which we would find those funds, we have been negotiating now for 11 months and still don't have those funds.
But you've already laid off the people.
Of course.
And you haven't got the money to pay them.
No.
And if the provincial doesn't give the money to pay them, it means you've got to close classes and throw people out.
Yes. But the other bind we're in, of course, is that the more you reduce our budget, the more people we're going to have to terminate, the more you're going to have in the way of termination pay. Because whether we like it or not, you cannot terminate people without some reasonable termination.
Now, questions and comments to Dr. George Pedersen, former president of the University of British Columbia. for academics listening, and no, we don't want to nag you too much, but okay, you quit yesterday, announced the job. Did you know that you had been a subject of a search by the University of Western Ontario? You didn't apply for the job.
No, I didn't know, but that's pretty common practice, that people approach you. And in my view, that's the way you typically get the people you want anyway.
And you had been approached a little while previously.
Yes.
And had you turned it down at the time?
Yes.
And yesterday you changed your mind, lifted your phone and said, I'll take the job.
That's right. You got it.
I got it. Okay, calls. Go ahead to Dr. Pedersen.
Good morning, Mr. Pedersen. Good morning, Jack.
Morning.
I'm really sorry to hear you quit the university, Mr. Pedersen. I think you could have done a better job staying there. I'm a student with the education department, and since you're quitting, I'm quite seriously considering myself quitting. Seeing the top people sort of, in a way, jump the ship. You don't really leave an example for us people down here who are going through the system. Not to mention, what am I going to do when I get out anyway? Am I going to have a quality education? Am I going to be able to go to people and say, I graduated from UBC and I have a quality education? Will they look at me and laugh, or will they look at me with respect? And I also have a question.
Just a minute.
Well, let me try to respond to the first issue of jumping ship. That obviously was something that I worried about a great deal. Worried about the possibility that other people within the university might decide that if the president's going to leave, then I probably ought to leave as well. I've already tried to respond to that as well as I could by indicating that I thought I had given it as good a shot as I could, and that I did not see myself in a position where I was going to continue to make any difference. And there's no point in staying in a position if you're just going to beat your head against the wall, and that's what I really saw happening.
Well, I'm really sorry to hear that you have left. And my second question is...
let me
just a minute, caller. Go on.
Let me just go on. I think it's important to recognize that in a large organization, there's no single individual that's absolutely indispensable to it at all. It's naive to believe that. And there are just a lot of able people around who I'm sure would be interested in the possibility of taking on that job. So, you know, let me try to encourage you not to make the sort of rash decision that you were suggesting there. I think you should stay in school. I realize the job market is not fantastic at the present time, but I think it's important also to recognize that there is not the sort of overabundance of teachers that we keep hearing about all the time. There is a need for more teachers in this province, and there's going to continue to be a need. It's true there are surpluses, but in many cases those surpluses are people who are place-bound. They're in a particular region, and for whatever reasons, family or otherwise, are unable to move. So I would encourage you. It's very important that we keep young people in our universities and certainly in the teaching profession.
Second point.
Second point. I found, while working down at the expo site part-time, I found what I believe to be as a cannonball. Now, I'd like to take it to some place at UBC and to find out if it is actually a cannonball.
Well, that is totally irrelevant, a non sequitur, off the point, very interesting, and take it down to the museum. Why would he spoil a perfectly good first question with a second question like that? I thought he was going to say he was going to take the cannonball and fire it at McGeer or something. But he let me down.
Maybe he was hostile enough at me he was going to hang it on my leg.
Yeah, maybe. Go ahead, please.
Good morning, Dr. Pedersen. I would like to suggest that perhaps the people of British Columbia and their representative, Dr. McGeer, should be able to make the choice of how much money they want to spend on university. And I take exception to many of those things. I would like to suggest, for instance, as someone who's very interested in the value of this university, that perhaps some of the 40-year-old students who have been on public roles in places like the marine biology department might have been terminated a very long time ago, which I suggested to you some time ago. The skipper of the ship that they keep to take these people around told the one I know, who told me, that he believed he should put them all ashore because there were a bunch of half-drugged idiots, and that they shouldn't even be on a shipboard. Also, I'd like to suggest...
Just a minute, ma'am.
One more thing. The dean who lives in our block, who uses university trucks for his daughter's...
I must protect myself. I'm not protecting you. Do hold on, ma'am. Do hold on, ma'am. You're a veritable mine of information, some of which I'm not sure of. Hold on, please. What's this ship you have?
I believe we have a marine biological vessel, but I don't know enough about it, Jack, to comment thoughtfully. I'm sorry I can't be helpful on that, but let me go back to the point that that is an important
she made
issue.
a very valid point at the beginning.
The question really focuses on, does the government have the right to say how much money it wants to spend, and does it have the right to suggest what kinds of programs? I don't think anybody quarrels with the right of properly elected officials to make those kinds of judgments. That's not what I'm arguing about. I'm arguing about the process by which we're going about this. I said it right at the beginning, as I've done on several other occasions, I do not disagree with the need for restraint both provincially and nationally. All of us who think about that at all recognize it. What is critical, however, is we go about the planning process for this in such a way that we don't damage our universities. And I'm arguing that the way we're doing it now is causing damage to the institutions. We can't make the sort of decisions that need to be made in the time frame we're being asked to make them in.
No, but you don't argue their absolute right to cut the budget to $10 million if they wish.
Right.
But you merely wish the planning to be done in a way that can be handled by professional academics and administrators.
Right. But I do think there is a danger in the program area. I do not think that government should have complete freedom to start saying we happen to like law at the moment, but we don't like sociology, or we like marine biology, but we don't like civil engineering. I think those are inappropriate kinds of judgments.
And you're saying that the university must be a rounded academic gathering of all the sciences and arts.
That's right. That's right.
Take that woman's number on 7 if she's still there. I don't want to let her to think I cut her off. I was merely fearful of what she was going to say, of which I had no knowledge, what may have damaged somebody by name and leave me liable. Go ahead, please.
Good morning, gentlemen. I just wanted to ask Mr. Pedersen if there's any way that the 35 units that are going to be looked at and maybe cut would be made public knowledge, because I'm a student at UBC, and I really would like to know, before I enter my 3rd year, which is one of the most important years, whether or not my programs can be affected, so if I can transfer or not to another institution. Because I feel Mr. Pedersen is acting on his best interest to go to another opening, and I feel I should know ahead of time if, to follow my best opportunity.
Well, I tried to respond to that earlier by indicating I did not think there was a great likelihood that programs would be discontinued at a point where people could not complete their degree programs. That would be completely irrational, and I think dynamite politically if a government made a decision that that sort of action would have to be taken. So I really do not think that you need to feel particularly threatened. The reason that we've tried not to make too much of a noise about the programs that are potential in terms of the potential be reduced or cut is that the knowledge of that in itself is damaging. I mean, if you go and talk to the faculty who are part of the School of Architecture, one of the things they will tell you is that, the fact that they've been fingered out and identified is of concern to them. It's of concern to them in terms of attracting students. It's of concern to them that somehow there was a reason for them being on such a list. And so we have tried as much as we could to keep that low profile, and I wouldn't think there is any intention at all to make that a public bit of information.
Of course not,
It's fairly widely known throughout the university community, and it wouldn't be that hard to sort out if somebody wanted to. But it's not the kind of thing that
rumors, and the reason I'm really concerned is because I only have limited funds, and for the 4 years that I do attend university, I want to get the best education possible. And if I know that I won't be getting that at UBC because of program cuts, I would like to know that before I get into the 3rd year, and all of a sudden, I get hit saying, wow, the program's not as good as I thought it was. And then, like the first caller said, people will not consider that you've had a good education if you come from UBC.
Yeah, I don't think there's any danger of that either. My reading is that people hold the University of British Columbia in high regard, and the people who graduate from there in high regard.
Thank you. More with Dr. Pedersen after the break. I don't know why you're smiling. I think you might have been shocked by a couple of these very sensitive calls from students, right?
No, what I'm smiling about was him telling you to look up and look bright.
Certain things are off the record.
I know, I understand that.
A good former university president, about to be one again soon, was talking about Fred, who gave me instructions because I was concentrating with ferocity. Go ahead from Chilliwack.
Morning.
Yes.
I would like to make some statements about a major item of expense that's UBC's administrative setup before asking my question.
Good.
I used to be a UBC student. While I value the university in many ways, I remember being reluctant to deal with the university's administration. I'm including all the clerks and other assistants, because I knew that I would get the runaround. I remember one of my professors saying in frustration that those in the administration building were living in fear of being replaced by a computer. He was fed up too. My recent contacts with UBC indicate that the problems still exist and that some people there are aware of them. My question is it not true that, as someone there once told me, UBC has a long tradition of providing mediocre service to the public, that this is largely due to a clumsy, over-large bureaucracy which is seriously in need of being made leaner and more efficient and more in agreement with public needs, and also whether cuts in administration are not quite appropriate.
You mean cuts that have been made have not been deep enough?
I'm hearing Dr. Pedersen talk this morning about cuts in programs, teaching programs.
Okay, administration. He's worried about the administration.
Yeah, I can't really comment on the question of, as was described, mediocrity of service. I think any university is always a little bit worried about how it treats its student clients, and it's been a matter of some interest to me. Indeed, we were, I have to put everything in the past tense here all of a sudden, we were taking a look at the question of how we might provide better services, and undoubtedly we could do a better job than we were doing. But I don't accept the point of view that says that the service was mediocre. On the question of bureaucracy or the size of the administration at UBC, I think it's important to recognize that the percentage of budget at UBC that's been devoted over the years to administration is one of the lowest in the country. Indeed, there have been occasions when perhaps one could argue maybe we should have been spending a bit more. But it is by far the lowest of any in the country, and at the present time, the absolutely superb Vice President Finance and Administration we have there, a man by the name of Bruce Gallatley, is taking a very thorough look at all of the support services at the present time, and there are some sizable savings that have been realized and undoubtedly will be realized in the period right ahead.
Go ahead, please.
Hello, Dr. Pedersen. It's Kevin Russell. You might remember me.
Hi, Kevin. How are you?
I'm doing fairly well, ever since I had to leave because of the Socrate cutbacks. I want to say first off that I have great respect for you for having the courage to quit in this situation.
Thank you.
That it was probably a very hard decision for you to make, and I hope some people are listening to what you're saying.
Thank you.
I'd say that I think my main question is we've been talking an awful lot about what's wrong with education in British Columbia. I think that we might want to talk about what do you think education should look like in British Columbia. Don't you think that, you see, we have a problem. When you talk about the fact that we have to cut in order to deal with some of the problems that British Columbia is having, including in education, shouldn't we be talking more about the efficiency of any one particular system and rather about how much money it gets? In other words, shouldn't we be teaching anybody who wants to have an education and making sure that that's an efficient system rather than talking about a total amount of money?
It's a little bit esoteric, a broad-range question, that one, is it not?
Yeah, I'm not sure I can get a total handle on it, Kevin. If you're suggesting that we really have to do much more in the way of overall planning, I couldn't agree more. I think there is a need for some very careful, serious thought on what sort of public policy we want to follow with respect to post-secondary education, and particularly university education in BC. My impression is that we have virtually no policy on this matter, that each institution, in effect, is dictating its own.
Go ahead, please.
Good morning, Jack.
Morning.
Good morning, too, to Dr. Pedersen.
Morning.
He has obviously been a very, very gracious guest on your program this morning, and I'm sure that all of us here in BC are going to miss him greatly. I didn't have the opportunity to attend UBC during Dr. Pedersen's tenure there. I wanted to express a hope which could be looked at in terms of a question, and that is that I would hope that Dr. Pedersen's personal sacrifice here may be the catalyst to bring about some change in the public perception of the role of the university in British Columbia, and to do that more effectively than a gaggle of student-backed protests. Does he believe that that what he has done may in fact have that effect. That's not to say that there's anything wrong, incidentally, with students taking their stand, but rather that a public official of Dr. Pedersen's stature within British Columbia's education system has felt so strongly about this that he would...
Yeah, I think you've expressed that well, and it's a difficult one for you to answer.
Well, let me say, first of all, I don't see myself as any martyr. But I did indicate yesterday at the press conference that I felt that if I could, by the action I took, raise public consciousness to the point that they became very concerned about the universities, that the action I had taken would be very worthwhile.
Thank you again, Dr. Pedersen. Oh, incidentally, Jack, in light of Dr. Pedersen's remark earlier in the program, and in jest, of course, you might refer him to Joan Vincent.
Who is she again?
Center for the Non-Traditional Unemployed.
Thank you very much indeed. Center for the Non-Traditional Unemployed. Go ahead, please.
Mr. Pedersen.
Yes.
I wish you luck in your travels, sir, but quite frankly and honestly, I don't believe you'll last any longer at Western Ontario than you did around here.
Well, you may be quite right. That's entirely
I know
possible.
from experience, sir, that professional agitators, whiners, and bellyachers are less appreciated in the so-called greener pastures of Ontario than around here. And having since 1979 been exposed to your constant media event whining and bellyaching, I'm only too happy to buy you a crying towel for use at Western Ontario U with the little money that I have, and bid you good luck and good riddance, sir.
Thank you, sir.
More with Dr. Pedersen after the break. About the possible prescience expressed by a listener, I'm using that word to impress you.
Yes.
That your sacrifice may result in changes. The latest rumor is this morning is that the budget is so too going to be filled with goodies.
Oh, good. Well,
so therefore,
great.
that may be the +2 and not the -5.
Okay.
And it may be that they will do that to spite you, regardless of their overall planning. I don't ask you to comment on that. Go ahead, please.
I have 2 or 3 points, and I'd like to make those and then listen. First of all, I'm very sorry to hear that Dr. Pedersen is leaving. And I'd like to react to the press clips of Dr. McGeer, where he portrayed British Columbia as a happy hunting ground for presidents elsewhere in Canada. And I think this is the first time in the history of UBC that a president has left to accept presidency at another university. The other side of the coin is if we do lose good academics, we must be sure to replace them with just as good quality academics coming in. You've mentioned the federal transfer payments, and I remember, Jack, when you interviewed McGeer once, you let Dr. McGeer off the hook on this one, and it used to be that the payments were audited by Ottawa to make sure that a higher education buck went to higher education, and I wonder if Dr. Pedersen could comment on that. The other part of the solution, the other question I want to raise is that the universities, in partnership with the province, should be part of the solution and not the problem. And I wonder if Dr. Pedersen could comment on how education helps the economic growth of the province. As more graduates with more education produce more tax dollars.
I can't comment on the question of how those federal transfer payments are audited, but the important point to make is that from the point of view of the province, they are not categorical. That is, they're not specific for higher education.
There was a time before they established programs when they were categorical.
There was a time, indeed, in Canada when federal funds went directly to the universities themselves, but that resulted in a very big Donnybrook with Duplessis when he was the Premier of Quebec. On the question of universities or the question of educated manpower, there are, in the eyes of economists at least, 2 very different points of view. There are those to whom I happen to subscribe, who are the supporters of so-called human capital development. Probably the leading proponent of that would be a man named Ted Schultz, an economist who won the Nobel Prize 3 years ago. It's a man I had the pleasure of working with at the University of Chicago. And his argument essentially is that any society that elects to invest in its people through education and health and a variety of other forms will have a higher rate of return to investment than they will receive, that society would receive out of any other form of investment. And he puts education very high in that sort of priority. In other words, there is a close correlation between gross national product and level of education in any of the developed countries in the world. That's one side, and Schultz would argue that's a positive correlation, that you've got to have well-educated people to have high standards of living. The other side of it would be those economists who are not at all sure about that relationship and who simply suggest that countries that are wealthy spend a lot of money irrationally on education. So there is really no answer to that question. I happen to be very strongly of the view that the sort of investment we should be making is the investment in our young people.
Human capital. Thank you. Go ahead, please.
Good morning, Dr. Pedersen.
Morning.
I am a university student in my 4th year, and fortunately for me, I will be graduating from the university this year. But I have a fear that if I should decide to do graduate work in any field, it won't be there. I know that for people who are in 2nd and 3rd and even 1st year, that fear is even stronger. They fear for the continuation of their programs. What does the long-range future hold for the university, and can you address that fear that students have?
Well, I've tried hard to say something about that. I can't imagine people who are in programs not being allowed to finish those programs. That would make no sense at all in the eyes of anybody working in the university, and it would take a terribly severe budget situation before you'd have to close down programs before people who had started them get an opportunity to finish. I can't comment on the question of the future.
No, but postgraduate.
On the question of graduate work, it's conceivable that the university could reach a point where it would have to cut back on some of its programs in the areas in which someone like this might be interested. But I can't comment on where that might, be or the extent of it. I just don't know that.
But postgraduate work would seem to be, with no knowledge at all, to be an automatic budget target, the prime consideration being your undergraduate degrees.
No, typically in any unit on a campus, they offer both undergraduate and graduate work. And indeed, if it's a good university, it's doing that. And in fact, you couldn't attract and retain good faculty if you weren't offering high-quality graduate work as well as undergraduate.
So you give the woman some hope?
Sure.
Thank you. Go ahead, please.
Morning, Dr. Pedersen.
Morning.
Dr. Pedersen, there are reports that you signed an agreement with the 2 other major universities, UVic and SFU, and their presidents, and or the university's council, a letter of intent or agreement to pursue a type of strategic planning or long-range planning. And my question has 3 parts to it. First of all, are those reports correct? Secondly, what was the process in general terms, what they were committing themselves to, the 3 universities, what they were committing themselves to, and how does that process differ from the one that I assume you are in disagreement with?
There has been a great deal of discussion in the last 2 or 3 months, about the necessity of better coordinated planning. It comes about really, I think, at the initiation of the Premier. At some time in December, he met with the university's council, indicated some dissatisfaction with the way in which things were going as far as universities were concerned. And as a result of that meeting, a meeting of the university presidents and the university's council and the minister and others was held. It was pointed out that unless the 3 universities were prepared to say that they were willing to coordinate their activities and work closely with the council, that the budget situation might be even worse than we had anticipated. And so there was such a letter signed. I could say to you that I'm hopeful that something might well come out of that, but at the present time I have no idea what that planning process is going to look like, nor has the university's council. The minister himself sent a letter not too long ago indicating that we should now embark on a 5-year academic planning program of some kind along the lines of what we've been doing for capital development, that is for new building development on the university campuses. The capital development program didn't work out at all, and in fact, I guess, has been abandoned. I would hope that the proposal to start doing something in the way of an academic planning process will be successful. I think the important point to make here is the initiative and the leadership for that kind of thing has to come from the ministry. You cannot expect the three universities sort of on their own single initiative to start trying to do that kind of thing. It simply isn't possible to do that, and it does require a coordinating role either by the council, university's council, or through the ministry itself. I don't know where the locus of that should be. The truth of the matter is that the university's council, I don't think, has been an overly effective body since it was started in 1974.
Satisfied with the answer?
Yeah, you say that the Premier met with the university's council and initiated that type of coordinated approach to long-term planning. Are you in agreement with that sort of initiative and that type of approach, Dr. Pedersen?
I have been hollering about planning for at least the last 10 years, I guess, and the need for it in this province. I seem to remember making a speech about 1975 or 76 along the line that says we've got to get something like that going.
The point he's getting at is you did not object. You approved of this move by the Premier to get all together.
We didn't have any choice on whether we did or didn't, but obviously the university should be working closely with one another and with the university.
But you didn't regard that as interference in some way?
I don't think that's inappropriate interference, no. I think that that's quite legitimate on the part of the government to request that.
Jack, I've got one other question.
Hold on, please. After the break. Your last question?
Yes, Dr. Pedersen, some time ago, did you discuss with the Board of Governors or, in fact, request them to release you from your contract so that you could become president of the University of Ontario? Is that a true rumor?
There is no University of Ontario.
University of Toronto.
The answer is I did not ask to be released in order to consider a position there.
Good, thank you. Go ahead, please.
Good morning, Dr. Pedersen.
Morning.
You agreed with Dr. McGeer on some things. What I'm asking about is your opinion on entrance examinations and
come on.
People with money and brains, and money and no brains, and no money and brains.
Your question boils down to entrance examinations for universities.
Yeah, and where money will come into it. Thank you very much.
Okay. On the question of examinations, it's important to remember what they're intended to do. They are primarily, as I see it, a means of trying to predict success. And I am in favor of anything that will assist young people to make good judgments about whether they're liable to be successful in a given venture. In the case of university entrance examinations, I would not oppose them, but obviously there's no point in having those as well as provincial examinations. I sometimes wonder if the provincial examinations could not be replaced by entrance examinations for those, that is, restricted only to those who are planning to go on to university. But basically, I think you want as many good measures as you can of the likelihood of success.
Go ahead, please.
Good morning, gentlemen.
Morning.
Dr. Pedersen, I'd like to compliment you on what you've done at UBC.
Thank you.
Particularly to compliment you on the effort that you've made, and I think it's a good one, to let the public know about the problems of higher education. I went to your lecture at the Vancouver Institute about 2 years ago, was it not?
Yes, got me in a lot of trouble.
And I remember the warning that you gave then, and I thought it was well taken and well put. And I want to wish you the best in Western.
Thank you.
I ask you if perhaps you would like to comment further on what seems to me to be a terrible dichotomy. Our government here emphasizing high tech so much and yet cutting back on higher education. Now, I know you've addressed this a bit, but perhaps you'd like to say a little more.
Well, I get a little bit concerned because I hear rumors to the effect that we're going to get interventions in the form of giving particular funding for special kinds of programs. That's not to say that we shouldn't have those sorts of initiatives in certain areas, but I think it's important to recognize that a university is not another form of technical school, and I don't mean that in any pejorative sense as far as technical schools are concerned. But if you're serious about providing high-quality university education, you have to have as a fundamental core its basic liberal education, its arts and its science, and you should recognize that one of the best graduates you produce in a university is someone with that broad education, who has good analytical skills, who has the capacity to ask high-quality questions, who has the capacity to be flexible, that is, to move into other areas as need arises, and not too highly specialized an individual.
Go ahead, please.
Good morning, Dr. Pedersen.
Morning.
I'm sure you've discussed the point I'm going to raise with the campus bleeding hearts 1,000 times. Now, I graduated last year from a UBC master's program, and I had approximately 20% of my fellow students from places like Germany, Great Britain, Hong Kong, Hong Kong, Singapore, etc. Now, all these people came to the Canadian universities simply because it's so much cheaper for them to go here than it is to go there. I'm wondering, why don't you save the universities a lot of money by pricing at the market price?
Well, I don't know what happened at yesterday's board meeting, but there was a proposal before them to increase the foreign student fee to 2.5 times the regular fee as far as the undergraduate program is concerned. There was no recommendation, however, at the graduate level. And I think it's important to recognize that in the field of higher education, one of the things you try to do is have a mix of students who come from all parts of the world. You do not try to run very parochial kinds of programs. Obviously, anybody coming from Germany indeed is paying a higher price because there is no tuition at all in the German universities. I think that investing in foreign students is one of the most important forms of foreign aid that this country can provide. If you assist those people to get their education, they go back, they become major leaders in their own countries, they have attitudes toward this country that are highly positive. I would suggest to you, sir, there will be a high economic return to that investment as well, as far as Canada is concerned.
Go ahead, please.
Good morning, Mr. Webster and Dr. Pedersen.
Morning.
I understand that yesterday on another talk show, Dr. Pedersen, you said that conditions for post-secondary institutions were similar to when the NDP were in power. I wonder, based on that comment, my question is, have conditions and standards in our post-secondary institutions not changed or really improved that much over the past 10 or 15 years, in your opinion?
I'm not sure I understand the comment that you attributed to me for starters about the NDP. What was that?
It's my understanding that really this was, I didn't hear this directly, sir, but
in that case, I hate taking second-hand questions based on some other...
Yeah, but there is an interesting observation to make here, and that is frequently some of my colleagues will say, wouldn't it be nice if we had the NDP in to assist us out of our dilemma? The truth of the matter is that the time when support for universities in British Columbia started to go on the skids was during the period when the NDP were in, and the Socreds have just maintained that.
Hello. Oh, sorry, wrong one. Go ahead, please.
Good morning. Surely it's easy for someone to kick their former employer in the teeth when they've already accepted a job in excess of $100,000 a year. And wouldn't you have more credibility if you just quit without having previously feathered your own nest?
Well, I've already commented on the question of moving, ma'am. I'm not sure that I'm kicking anybody in the teeth in any manner any different than I was doing when I was in the job. I think the concerns that I have now are exactly the same ones I had 6 months ago.
Go ahead, please.
Dr. Pedersen, my question is, having been a graduate of UBC from some years ago and worked in social services in the meantime and recently gone back, I was a veteran of the social services wars, and one of the shocking things to me was to see the impact that the kind of unbridled criticism of civil service had on the morale of people who were attempting to do the job in social services. And I'm wondering if you see a similar impact on the morale of the people who have to teach at the university, in the sense that kind of a parallel to your own situation of being in a no-win where you're faced with impossible alternatives. Isn't that also true for the people that are struggling to teach, in the sense that they're faced with an uncertain future? They have no idea where the attack is coming from, whether it's going to land on them or their department, and does that have a negative impact on their ability to carry on their day-to-day duties at the level at which they have previously done?
Well, I have already indicated that the need for restraint is something that I accept. And indeed, I think almost everybody who works in the university accepts that point of view. That is not the big morale destroyer at the university, I don't think. What is of a concern is a perception that says that the universities are relatively low priority and that the work that is going on there is not of great consequence. I know that I've talked to politicians and they say that's not the message that they're trying to give, that they hold the universities in high regard and so on. But the perception, and that's obviously what people work on, the perception is that they're not held in high regard, and that's the morale destroyer.
Go ahead, please.
Yeah, hello. Earlier in the program, you were complaining that other spheres of British Columbia, the education system, has been getting more publicity than that at UBC, and I was wondering if you can't accept some responsibility for not creating a better image of the university within the community, and letting the Socreds know that, so that they aren't as harsh on the system.
That's a good point, and possibly a legitimate criticism. On the other hand, you have to recognize that as a university president, and this would be true of my two counterparts at Simon Fraser and UVic, you have to walk a pretty delicate line. And that delicate line goes along the following, that you have to appear to be providing the sort of support and leadership within your own university community, and to comment on things that you perceive to be detrimental to that organization. But at the same time, you're directly dependent on government, and you can't spend all of your time being critical of government. Obviously, we should be in a situation where we're trying to partner this thing, that there should be some kind of partnership arrangement that's going on where we can sit down with one another, talk about the nature of the problems that we've got, and see if there aren't some ways in which we can solve those problems jointly. I'm encouraged and impressed with some of the more recent comments that are coming from government in this province along the lines that say we should be doing things along this line. But that's obviously very different. That's a totally different posture than we've been encountering for about the past 2 years.
Final segment with Dr. Pedersen after the break. In case you just tuned in, I am presently finishing up a 90-minute interview with a man who will become the president of the University of Western Ontario. Until yesterday, he was the president of UBC, and he quit somewhat dramatically and unexpectedly in a very surprise move, and because of frustrations over running the university. And he said at the time that if his resignation did nothing more than to dramatize the plight of the university system, it will have been an action worthy of the taking. I've had some very good responses this morning, critical and praiseworthy. Go ahead, please.
Yes, good morning, Jack and Dr. Pedersen. I have just one question, and I'd kind of like to make a little comment afterwards, but my question to you, Dr. Pedersen, is, just bluntly, would you have handled your resignation, including what I consider to be a cheap shot at the government in view of the situation, would you have handled it that way had you not had a job such as you have from University of Western Ontario or some other institution in your hip pocket?
I probably would not. The answer to that is no.
Fair enough. Thank you. Go ahead. As a matter of fact, independence gives you freedom, doesn't it?
Does indeed.
And if you don't have independence of some kind, you don't have no freedom. Go ahead, please.
Yes, Dr. Pedersen, I understand Dr. Smith is the person who's responsible for sending out the show cause letters to the various schools and faculties. Is that true?
They went out over his signature, but they certainly involved a lot of other people in the content that went into them, and that is in determining the content that went in them.
Including yourself, of course.
Yes, of course.
Right. Has a scenario been set determining where those cuts will be made, or is Dr. Smith now in the position of having less time to evaluate the policies and make a decision on that?
I think it would be quite inappropriate for me to be making comments at this time. He's been appointed in the role that I had, and I wouldn't for even the slightest moment want to try and prejudge him. I think you can have my assurance he's an absolutely superb individual. He's an outstanding administrator. I think the university is very fortunate to have him take over at this time.
But at this stage, without putting panic in the streets, he is following the course decided upon when you were president of the university.
That's right.
Go ahead, please.
Thank you. Good morning. I'm an ex-UBC student. I just graduated last year. I'm hoping that Dr. Pedersen could give some advice about what action students and ex-students should be taking to help. That is, what kind of measures are effective and what kind of measures are really ineffective.
Well, my experience has been that the one thing that politicians do regularly is they read the mail. And I think if there's enough in the way of public concern about the educational system or about the universities, that you'll get some response. Clearly, governments these days are very active in using polls, and I think that at least up until fairly recently, the concern about universities simply wasn't there.
It is there now, though.
Well, I hope so.
Go ahead, please.
Yes, good morning, gentlemen. My question would relate to Dr. Pedersen and the situation in British Columbia, which is a very disturbing situation in the educational system. that the government should not be accountable in an independent survey to the responsibility of the public to explain its manner in which it has taken an unbridled attack, as I see it, on the education system, and that we continue to lose quality people of your stature.
Is there a question in there?
No, just a comment. Thank you. Go ahead, please.
Good morning.
Morning.
Yes, I'm a U.S. citizen, and for the past 2 years, I've been going to school at Western Washington University. And the department in which I was in had 3/4 of them were Canadian people, mainly from B.C. And my question is that why are these people coming south to a university down here for they want real good quality for their education, but they're going south instead of going to UBC, where they'd rather go in the first place to save money?
Well, I can't answer the question. We do have a reciprocal agreement with the state of Washington. That is, we recognize each other's students, and they can come to the respective jurisdictions at the regular student fee. They don't have to pay an out-of-state or non-resident fee.
Go ahead, please.
Good morning. I'd like to, first of all, express my concern about Dr. Pedersen's decision to leave the province. He's certainly committed a great part of his professional life to administrative service here, and it's a great loss to British Columbia that he's leaving. The question that I wanted to raise with him has to do with the well-documented data from Stats Canada.
Quickly, please, quickly.
About the low participation rate in this province.
We'll deal with that if we can, because I think you said the participation of students is the lowest in the country?
It is the lowest in Canada, and that includes all students now. It used to be just the university sector, but my understanding is if you aggregate everybody, we're down at the bottom. If I'm asked to account for it, the answer is I don't know the answer.
More with Dr. Pedersen after the break. Well, I must compliment you on your accessibility to the media while you've been in this country, while you've been in this province, and you've certainly helped a lot of people to understand the problems, although many people will be unhappy at the way of your going. How much will you miss British Columbia?
Miss it a lot. It's a great province. City of Vancouver is a great place to live. Miss the University of British Columbia. We have a lot of ties here over a long period of time, all of our family and so on here.
Best of luck, George Pedersen. I'll be back Monday, 9 a.m. precisely. How old are you?
I'm 52, sir.
That's pretty
Well,
good.
you look 58. That's how you look at this moment.
But if other people think you have a problem and you don't think you have a problem, then there's no problem. And
You are a great politician. You really are. You can sure turn around and answer, so you don't criticize your friends, but you give me a little bit of concession. Go ahead, please. You're skilled. Nancy, whatever you are, drop in. Nancy what? Bell.
Nancy Bell. Yes.
From where?
She's from Nanaimo.
Oh, Nanaimo. Oh,
Yes.
good. Didn't know Nanaimo had a
Well, I'll
senator.
certainly communicate that message, Jack.
Thank you. I've done my best myself.
I make it an educated assessment, and I'm in a good position to make it, too.
Not any better than me.
Well, maybe I am.
We'll challenge your educational qualifications.
No,
I am an honorary doctor.
Well, you are.
We'll try that free-for-all on Monday? Hmm? We can make this a standing joke, couldn't we? Oh, Christ almighty, what have you been doing all week, you three, for Christ's sake? You two, anyway. I'm ready. Promises, promises, promises. Free-for-all Monday, 9 a.m. precisely. Fuck. Check.